There's a strange moment in your life when you realize this uncomfortable truth. It was never your desire that was delayed. It was your doubt that kept hitting the brakes. And the wildest part? You didn't even notice you were doing it. You thought you were being realistic, staying cautious or waiting for signs. But every time you questioned the process froze. Neville Goddard said it simply: the second you stop doubting, creation unfreezes, and everything starts to move with a speed that feels almost unfair. Think about it. You've imagined, affirmed, visualized, felt the wish fulfilled, but deep down, you were still checking to see if anything was happening. That small habit of checking is the exact thing that slows everything down. It's like planting a seed and then digging it up every morning to check for roots. You didn't fail because you couldn't manifest. You didn't fail because the law of assumption doesn't work. You only failed because doubt kept returning you to the old state the moment the new one began forming. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop doubting, truly stop, things begin shifting quietly behind the scenes. People change, conversations change, circumstances bend, opportunities appear from directions you never expected. Not because you're working harder, but because your inner world finally stopped arguing with your desire. And when the argument ends, movement begins. In this video, you're going to understand why certainty is more powerful than effort, why your imagination wasn't the problem, and how the simple act of not questioning becomes the turning point that changes absolutely everything. There's a moment in everyone's life when they realize something uncomfortable. Doubt has been the invisible hand slowing everything down. And the wild part? Most people think doubt is harmless. They think it's normal to wonder, is it working? Why hasn't it happened yet? But that tiny question is the exact thing blocking the very change they're begging for. Neville Goddard tried to warn us over and over. The moment you stop doubting, creation stops freezing and starts moving. Imagine this. Someone spends days visualizing, practicing the wish-fulfilled Neville method, repeating that they believe, yet deep down they're still checking if things are happening in 3D. That's the trap. They think they have faith, but what they actually have is conditional hope. And conditional hope is the enemy of faith and assumption Neville talked about so clearly. It keeps the person swinging between desire and fear, like a pendulum that never stops. Most people don't fail because they can't imagine. They fail because they imagine beautifully for a second, but then doubt creeps in and erases the progress. It's not the universe saying no, it's the person returning to the old state without even noticing. They keep asking if imagination creates reality, really works while simultaneously recreating the same reality through their fear. This internal contradiction is what delays manifestation. Not the world, not timing, not luck. Think of someone who plants a seed and digs it up every day to check if it's growing. That's what doubt does. It interrupts the state, breaks the energy, and dissolves the feeling real Neville Goddard insisted was the true creative power. And the craziest part? People blame circumstances instead of noticing how often they abandon the state of live in the end just because the physical world hasn't updated yet. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The moment someone stops doubting, truly stops, things begin to shift with a speed that feels almost unfair. Why? Because creation is finished explained in the simplest way. The moment the assumption stabilizes, life rearranges itself to reflect it. No pushing, no forcing, no waiting. Just alignment, quiet, calm, inevitable. And if someone has ever wondered why things manifested quicker when they didn't care as much, this is why. When there's no doubt, there's no resistance. When there's no resistance, the law of assumption works effortlessly. It's not magic, it's mechanics, inner mechanics. And when the inner world stops arguing, the outer world stops delaying. This video is for the person who is tired of waiting, tired of being stuck, tired of doing everything right, but still seeing nothing change. Because the problem was never lack of effort, it was the presence of doubt. And once doubt dissolves, movement begins. Once movement begins, life becomes unrecognizable, fast. And that's what we're diving into right now. When he first hears that doubt freezes creation, he thinks it sounds poetic, until he notices how often his own questioning stops things from unfolding. Every time he asks if the desire is coming, he interrupts the very movement he started. It's like hitting pause without realizing it. Neville Goddard tried to show that the instant someone stops doubting, something in the unseen world unclenches, and that unclenching begins the shift. He starts to realize that doubt is not neutral, it's active. It pulls him back into the old state, even when he's doing his best to feel it real Neville Goddard style. Imagine someone stepping on the gas while holding the brake. That's what constant questioning does. It confuses the subconscious and slows the momentum of the wish-fulfilled Neville method. When the brake is released, even slightly, everything begins moving forward again. He remembers times in life when things suddenly clicked the moment he stopped caring about the outcome. Back then, he wasn't consciously using the law of assumption, but the mechanics were the same. The moment he quit obsessing, life flowed. That's what happens when doubt relaxes its grip. Without resistance, faith and assumption, Neville talked about, take over naturally. Most people don't see doubt as a force, but it is. Doubt freezes energy, freezes momentum, and freezes the unfolding of the new state. It's like mist covering a window. What's behind it hasn't disappeared, it's just blocked from view. When he breathes out and lets the mist fade, he sees again, and the universe responds instantly to that clarity. If someone could peek into their inner world the moment they stop questioning, they would feel a shift in atmosphere, a softness, an opening, almost like the universe whispering, finally. Imagination creates reality, but doubt interrupts the signal. When the signal becomes clean, the movement becomes inevitable, even if the 3D hasn't updated yet. He begins to understand that doubt isn't just a feeling, it's a state, and the state he occupies produces the reality he sees. That's why creation is finished explained makes so much sense. Everything already exists, but his state determines which version he experiences. When he stops doubting, he steps into the version where the desire is already unfolding. Think of doubt like static on a radio. He might be tuned to the right station, but the static distorts the message. When he stops questioning, the static disappears, and the transmission becomes clear. The subconscious receives the instruction cleanly. This is done. And once the subconscious accepts something, the outer world must follow. Have you ever noticed how children assume things will happen without questioning? That's why their desires manifest so easily. They live in the end naturally. Adults, however, talk themselves out of their own power. He realizes that the more he stops doubting, the more childlike and powerful his assumption becomes. When he truly rests in the assumption, something inside him unwinds, not with effort but with relief. That's when faith becomes quiet certainty, not forced positivity. Neville Goddard said, "Feeling is the secret, because feeling is what removes doubt. And once doubt is gone, the new reality has no opposition." He starts to see the pattern. Whenever he questions, things slow. Whenever he relaxes, things move. It's not luck. It's not coincidence. It's the law of assumption responding to the absence of internal contradiction. And as he feels this truth sink in, something else becomes clear. The next step is understanding how assumption hardens into fact and why doubt disrupts that process. He starts to notice that every assumption he holds, even the tiny ones he barely thinks about, quietly shape his world. Neville Goddard wasn't exaggerating when he said assumption hardens into fact. He was describing how reality becomes a mirror polished by repetition, but the moment doubt slips in, it's as if he wipes the mirror with muddy hands, blurring the reflection he was trying to create. When he assumes something with clarity, truly assumes it, the subconscious treats it like a command. It doesn't negotiate, doesn't argue, doesn't care about logic. It simply obeys. But when doubt enters, the command is cancelled. He switches states without realizing it, returning to the old identity, the old emotion, the old version of himself. That's how the law of assumption gets disrupted. It becomes clear that doubt isn't random. Doubt is loyalty to the old state. It's the voice that says, be realistic, nothing changes for you, or you've tried this before. And every time he listens to that voice, he steps back into the version of himself who never believed imagination creates reality. That version cannot manifest because it's trapped in contradiction. He remembers a moment from his past when he wanted something deeply, a job, a relationship, a breakthrough, and for a few days he assumed it was his. Everything felt light, possible, but then doubt returned, whispering little fears. Suddenly, things stalled. Back then he thought the universe said no. Now he sees the truth. He said no by returning to the old state. Assumption, he realizes, isn't a ritual. It's a shift in identity. When he assumes the wish-fulfilled Neville method, he becomes the version of himself who already has it. But doubt pulls him back to the version who is still waiting, hoping, longing. And waiting is not receiving. Hoping is not having. Only the feeling it real Neville Goddard taught can anchor the new reality. He begins noticing how people sabotage themselves. They imagine beautifully at night, but in the morning they check for signs. Checking is doubt in disguise. It may look innocent, but energetically, it's a return to the old state. Creation is finished explained this perfectly. Once something exists in imagination, the only job is to stay aligned with it. Think of it like baking a cake. Once it's in the oven, you don't keep opening the door every 2 minutes to see if it's rising. That ruins the process. Assumption is the oven. Doubt is opening the door. Every time he peaks, he cools the momentum. Every time he holds the assumption, the cake rises unseen but inevitable. He begins practicing a new mindset. Assume first, observe later. The old way was observing first, then reacting, which trapped him in repeating cycles. But now he sees that faith and assumption Neville insisted on are proactive, not reactive. They come before evidence, not after. He also realizes that doubt isn't a flaw, it's a habit, and like any habit, it can be replaced. Every moment he notices doubt and returns to the assumption, he is training his subconscious to stay in the new state longer, and the longer he stays there, the faster the 3D must conform. As he feels this deeper in his bones, he starts recognizing the pattern. The more he stabilizes his assumption, the less doubt seduces him back into the old world. And that sets the stage for understanding the hidden danger, the belief that doubt is harmless, when in reality, every moment of doubt reinforces the reality he's trying to leave behind. He begins to understand that doubt isn't just a passing feeling, it's creative. This realization shocks him. Most people imagine doubt as something passive, something that simply slows progress. But Neville Goddard revealed something crucial. Doubt actively recreates the old state. Every time he second guesses, he isn't standing still. He's rebuilding what he desperately wants to leave behind. It's like someone trying to clean their house while constantly dragging in mud from outside. They wonder why the floor never looks clean, yet they don't notice the habit that ruins the progress. Doubt feels small, innocent, even responsible, but energetically it's a return to the version of himself who doesn't believe imagination creates reality. And the moment he returns there, the old reality reactivates. He notices how often people underestimate the power of their internal dialogue. A tiny thought, what if it doesn't work, might seem harmless, but in the language of the subconscious, that thought is a command. It tells the inner world to create scenarios where things don't work. That's the law of assumption functioning perfectly, just not in his favor. He remembers moments where everything seemed close to changing, and then suddenly life snapped back to the old patterns. Back then he blamed timing or God or bad luck. Now he sees the truth. He slipped into doubt at the exact moment persistence was needed. It wasn't the universe reversing his progress. It was him unconsciously reaffirming the undesired. There's something humbling about realizing how powerful every thought is. The wish-fulfilled Neville method requires consistency, not strain. But doubt disrupts that consistency. When he doubts, even for a second, he waters the wrong seed. He feeds the version of reality he no longer wants, and that version grows stronger through attention alone. Think of doubt like a muscle. The more he engages with it, the stronger it gets. And the stronger doubt becomes, the more natural it feels to entertain it. That's why the cycle feels endless. He's been strengthening the wrong muscle. But just as doubt can be strengthened, faith and assumption, Neville emphasized, can be strengthened too, simply by giving them more attention. He starts catching himself in the act. A worried thought appears. Instead of letting it run wild, he pauses, he breathes, he shifts. This is when feeling it real, Neville Goddard taught, becomes practical. The feeling of certainty dissolves the doubt before it expands. He chooses the new state instead of feeding the old one. Doubt, he realizes, thrives in moments of impatience. When he looks at the 3D world and sees no evidence, he feels tempted to question. But questioning is the doorway back to the old self. That's why creation is finished, explained, is so freeing. If the end is done, there's nothing to doubt. His only job is to remain congruent with the version where it's already true. He begins treating doubt like a signal instead of a setback. Whenever he feels it, he knows the old reality is trying to pull him back. That awareness alone gives him power. The moment he stops indulging doubt, he stops recreating what he no longer wants. It becomes easier to stand firmly in the law of assumption, no longer seduced by old emotions. As he stabilizes this understanding, the next insight starts forming naturally. Releasing doubt isn't about forcing faith, it's about discovering a quiet inner certainty that doesn't need proof from the outside world. And that inner certainty becomes the foundation for everything that follows next. He begins noticing that releasing doubt feels nothing like forcing positivity. It's more like unclenching a fist he didn't even know he was tightening. The moment he lets go, his assumption finally has space to breathe. It expands, settles, and takes root. This is the feeling Neville Goddard meant when he spoke of faith as a gentle knowing, not a fight, not a strain, just quiet inner certainty. He starts to see that faith isn't something he needs to build through willpower. It's something that naturally rises when he stops arguing with himself. Doubt is loud. Faith is soft. Doubt demands explanations. Faith simply rests. When he stops feeding the noise of worry, the calm voice of his true assumption becomes the dominant one. And that calmness feels like alignment. In everyday life, he notices this pattern too. When he's truly certain about something, he doesn't obsess over it. If he orders food, he doesn't sit wondering if the restaurant will actually cook it. The assumption is so natural he doesn't even think about it. That is the same energy required for the law of assumption. Not intensity, but normality. Not force, but acceptance. He realizes that doubt was suffocating his manifestations. It was like trying to grow a flower while constantly pinching the stem. But the moment he relaxes, the process resumes effortlessly. Faith and assumption, Neville emphasized, were never meant to be stressful. They're supposed to feel like breathing, natural, rhythmic, safe. This shift alone changes everything for him. He also discovers that certainty doesn't come from seeing results in 3D. It comes from trusting the feeling inside. When he really feels it real Neville Goddard style, the need for external validation fades. Something in him whispers, "It's done," and he believes it without checking. That's when assumption truly begins to harden into fact. He remembers a time when he wanted something intensely, but carried anxiety around it. The harder he tried to believe, the more strained he felt. Back then he confused effort with faith, but now he sees the truth. Real faith removes effort. Real faith feels like relief, not pressure. And the moment he relaxes into that relief, the desire begins moving toward him. It becomes clear that doubt was never a sign of failure. It was simply a habit, and habits lose their power when they're no longer entertained. As he stops engaging with doubt, he feels lighter. His chest expands. His mind softens. This internal shift creates a new emotional environment where the assumption can grow without interference. Even the 3D world begins to feel less intimidating. He no longer stares at circumstances trying to decode their meaning. He remembers Neville's teaching. Circumstances don't matter, only state matters. When he trusts his inner state, the outer world becomes less of a judge and more of a canvas. A canvas he is effortlessly painting with imagination. Each time he chooses inner certainty over old fears, he strengthens the new version of himself. It's not dramatic, it's quiet. A subtle yes to what he wants. A gentle refusal to entertain contradiction. And with each repetition, this calm state becomes his new default, the place he automatically returns to. The more he rests in this subtle certainty, the more he begins to sense the next layer of the journey, imagining the end, claiming it's done, and letting that feeling, not effort, not strain, guide him toward the reality he already knows exists. He starts discovering something liberating, imagining the end doesn't need to be a long, dramatic ritual. In fact, the shorter it is, the more powerful it becomes. Just a few seconds of living in the wish-fulfilled Neville method, truly feeling it, is enough for the subconscious to get the message. The key isn't duration, it's intensity. It's the clarity of the end scene, the emotional signature of "this is already mine." He practices this in small moments throughout the day. Instead of worrying, he gently closes his eyes and steps into the finished reality for just a breath or two. He imagines the result, feels the relief, and then quietly affirms, "It's done." There's no desperation in the words, only certainty. This soft inner declaration carries more power than hours of forced visualization. He realizes that the biggest mistake he used to make was revisiting the how. He would imagine, then immediately question the logistics. But the moment he does that, he steps out of the state. Creation is finished, explained why this step is unnecessary. The how is not his job. The end is his job. The how belongs to the unseen intelligence of the law of assumption. Whenever his mind tries to analyze, he gently redirects himself back to the feeling. The feeling is the anchor. Feeling it, real Neville Goddard style, is what imprints the desire into the subconscious. And once it's imprinted, he doesn't have to keep pushing. He simply has to stop pulling it out of the soil to check if it's growing. Loyalty to the feeling replaces the need to micromanage. He notices that this short practice helps him stay aligned without overwhelm. It's something he can do while waiting in line, brushing his teeth, or lying in bed. These tiny inner moments accumulate, shaping his inner identity. He's not trying to manifest. He's being the person who already has what he wants, and being is effortless. Sometimes he adds a small physical cue, a subtle exhale, a relaxing of the shoulders, to reinforce the feeling of completion. It's like his body participates in the assumption, grounding the inner reality into the physical. This gentle ease helps dissolve doubt quickly, because doubt cannot survive in a state of calm certainty. He remembers Neville's emphasis on naturalness. The end scene should feel familiar, not distant, so he chooses scenes that feel real. A congratulatory text from a friend, the sensation of having the money in his hand, the comfort of a relationship already secure. These scenes make the wish fulfilled feel close, like something he has lived before. Every time he stays loyal to the feeling, he notices the mind becoming quieter. Thoughts of doubt pass through, but no longer control him. The state becomes more stable. The assumption becomes more real than the outer world. And this is where the magic happens, when the inner world feels more convincing than the physical evidence. He starts to understand why Neville said, "Dare to assume," because assumption requires boldness. The boldness to trust feeling over fact, the unseen over the seen. And each day he practices this simple method, that boldness grows. He becomes the version of himself who no longer negotiates with doubt. The more familiar this state becomes, the more he begins to see how emotion, specifically gratitude, peace, and relief, dissolves doubt even faster. And that emotional shift becomes a bridge into the next realization waiting for him. He begins to understand that emotion is not decoration, it's the engine. When he feels gratitude, peace, or relief, something inside him shifts. Doubt can't coexist with those feelings. It melts in their presence. Neville Goddard emphasized feeling for a reason. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to the subconscious. And once the subconscious accepts something, it becomes law. He notices this in daily life. Whenever he lands in that calm place, that quiet inner certainty, the frantic need to question disappears. Gratitude becomes a signpost that he's in the new state. Peace becomes confirmation. Relief becomes proof that his assumption is settling in and replacing the old story. These emotions aren't forced, they arise naturally when he truly believes the wish-fulfilled Neville method. He begins treating these feelings like subtle indicators. If anxiety rises, he knows doubt is trying to return. If relief appears, he knows he's aligned. It's like checking the internal weather. And just as weather shifts, feelings shift. But the more he leans into gratitude, the more stable the forecast becomes. Feeling it real Neville Goddard style becomes easier when he recognizes the emotional signatures of alignment. He remembers times when he had no logical reason to feel calm, yet something in him felt sure everything would work out. Back then, he called it intuition. Now he recognizes it as assumption taking root. Creation is finished explained why certainty feels so natural. The end already exists, and the feeling is simply him tuning into it. Faith and assumption Neville taught aren't intellectual concepts, they're emotional frequencies. He starts using micro moments of gratitude to dissolve doubt instantly. When a fearful thought shows up, he doesn't fight it. He simply returns to the feeling, if it were done, how would I feel? That question softens him. It opens him. It brings him home to the new state. Doubt loses its power when he stops feeding it with attention and starts feeding the feeling of completion. He realizes that peace isn't passive. It's powerful. It's the evidence that the subconscious is accepting the new story. When he feels peace, he knows the seed of his assumption is sprouting underground. Even if the 3D world hasn't changed yet, peace tells him the process is working. It's his inner confirmation that the law of assumption is already in motion. Relief becomes one of his favorite markers. When he imagines the end and feels the tension leave his body, he knows he has shifted states. It's as if the subconscious says, yes, this belongs to you. That relief is what dissolves doubt faster than any affirmation. Feeling makes the new reality familiar, and once it's familiar, the subconscious replicates it automatically. He starts noticing that people who manifest easily always carry a sense of quiet confidence. They don't rush, they don't obsess, they don't cling. They radiate the emotional tone of someone who knows. That tone is what he begins cultivating, not by force, but by returning again and again to gratitude, peace, and relief. As he strengthens these emotional states, the assumptions become more stable. Doubt shows up less frequently, and when it does, it fades quickly. He begins living more in the end than in the present circumstances. And as that inner shift deepens, he starts seeing why the outer world takes time to catch up. Because what he sees today is only the echo of yesterday's assumptions. He starts realizing that the physical world is always delayed. What he sees right now isn't his current state. It's the leftover imprint of who he used to be. Neville Goddard compared the 3D world to a shadow, and now that finally makes sense to him. A shadow can only show the past. So when he looks around and sees no change, he no longer panics. He understands he's simply looking at an old echo, not a prophecy. This insight gives him power. Before, unchanged circumstances would immediately trigger doubt. He'd think, maybe it didn't work. Maybe I didn't imagine correctly. But now he knows better. Doubt would only pull him back to the old state, recreating more of what he doesn't want. Instead of questioning, he stabilizes his inner world. Feeling it real Neville Goddard style becomes his reference point, not the 3D evidence. He starts treating the outer world like a movie that's a few scenes behind the script he's writing internally. He no longer reacts to old scenes. He lets them play out, knowing the updated script will appear next. This alone dissolves so much anxiety. He stops trying to force the world to change and starts trusting that creation is finished, explained everything already. The end exists. It's just unfolding. Whenever frustration creeps in, he gently reminds himself, this is just yesterday's assumption showing itself. That short sentence becomes a lifeline. It keeps him from slipping back into fear. It keeps him anchored in the state he chose. Faith and assumption, Neville emphasized, become effortless when he stops expecting instant physical updates. He notices that staying loyal to the inner reality takes far less energy than constantly checking for signs. Checking is a form of doubt, but remaining calm, stable, and grounded feels like truth. Gratitude and peace become easier to hold when he understands the time lag of the 3D world. The more he relaxes, the faster things begin to shift outside. He begins using the unchanged 3D as proof, not of failure, but of progress. If he sees the old reality, it means the new one is already in motion. Just as a package in delivery doesn't disappear simply because it hasn't arrived yet, the manifestation doesn't vanish just because the world hasn't updated. This mindset keeps him steady, patient, and aligned. He remembers someone once telling him, "Don't dig up the seed because you can't see the roots." And suddenly that advice hits differently. Imagining the wish-fulfilled Neville method is planting the seed. Holding steady while 3D lags is letting it root. Doubt, however, is digging it up. He'd been uprooting his desires for years without realizing it. Even when something negative happens, he doesn't fall apart like he used to. He knows it's just the tail end of the old pattern leaving his life. The law of assumption doesn't get cancelled because of one bad day. It remains active. His only job is to persist in the inner state. Everything else eventually bows to that persistence. The more he understands this, the more he relaxes into a deep knowing. The inner world is cause, the outer world is effect, and no effect can override its cause. This awareness gives him a new level of calm confidence. He becomes untouchable by appearances. And as this new certainty strengthens inside him, he begins noticing subtle signs, shifts, emotions, and synchronicities that quietly reveal the new reality is already forming behind the scenes, and he's about to recognize the early stages of that movement. He starts noticing small things he used to dismiss, but now they feel different. A random message that matches his desire, an opportunity that shows up out of nowhere, a thought that feels placed, not produced. These subtle movements are the first indicators that his assumption has begun to harden into fact. They're not coincidences, they're confirmations. Neville Goddard called these bridges of incidence, and now he sees why. Sometimes the shift is internal rather than external. He wakes up feeling lighter for no clear reason. He feels oddly hopeful. He finds himself worrying less, reacting less, trusting more. These emotional shifts are early signs that the new state is taking root. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard style, creates these inner movements long before the physical world catches up. There are moments when he feels pulled towards certain choices, small intuitive nudges that didn't exist before. A sudden idea, a quiet urge, a thought saying, try this, or go there. He realizes these nudges are not random. They are movements born from the state he now occupies. The law of assumption reorganizes everything around him, including his intuition. Sometimes the signs are almost humorous. The exact phrase he affirmed appears in a song. A stranger talks about the very thing he imagined. A book falls off a shelf. These sparks of alignment whisper, you're on the right path. He begins treating these synchronicities as encouragement instead of dismissing them as accidents. He notices that even his body responds differently. The tension he used to carry softens. His breathing becomes naturally deeper. His shoulders relax without effort. This physical calmness is a sign that his subconscious has stopped fighting the new assumption. Creation is finished explained that once the inner conflict dissolves, the body mirrors the harmony. There's also a new kind of clarity in his thoughts. Doubts that once felt powerful now pass through like clouds instead of storms. They no longer seduce him back into the old state. This mental steadiness becomes one of the strongest indicators that his desire is unfolding. Faith and assumption, Neville emphasized, are becoming his new normal. Sometimes the sign is simply a shift in identity. He catches himself speaking differently, thinking differently, choosing differently. He begins acting like someone who already has what he asked for, not because he's faking it, but because the inner state has changed. This identity shift is proof in itself that the manifestation is underway. He becomes aware that movement doesn't always look dramatic at first. The universe often rearranges quietly before it rearranges loudly. A small delay disappears. An obstacle dissolves. A person changes their mind. Life starts opening paths he could never have forcefully created on his own. These subtle openings reveal that assumption is beginning to harden into fact. Even the things that go wrong now feel different. They don't shake him like before. Instead, he intuitively senses they're redirecting him, preparing space for something better. The law of assumption works through alignment, not chaos, and he starts trusting the unfolding even when he can't see the full picture yet. The more he notices these quiet signs, the more his conviction deepens. He becomes less focused on evidence and more focused on stability. And as conviction replaces curiosity, he begins to understand the next stage of the journey. The stage where checking for progress becomes unnecessary because the outcome feels inevitable. He begins stepping into a new kind of certainty, one that doesn't depend on signs, timing, or external reassurance. It feels different from hope. It feels different from positivity. It's conviction, a quiet, grounded, inner knowing. It's the moment when the wish-fulfilled Neville method stops being something he practices and becomes something he is. The inner shift is so real, he no longer thinks about if or when. He notices that curiosity fades naturally. He doesn't feel the urge to check if things are happening anymore. He doesn't scroll for manifestation signs, doesn't ask for proof, doesn't test the universe. He simply knows the law of assumption is working. Faith and assumption. Neville talked about become his daily atmosphere. Like background music he doesn't think about but always feels. It's like planting a seed and trusting the soil without staring at it every morning. There's no anxiety, no what if lingering in the back of his mind. Conviction makes the desired reality feel inevitable. His subconscious accepts it as normal, and because it's normal, he doesn't need to monitor it. He just lives from it. He thinks back to moments when he was truly certain about something, like knowing a paycheck was coming, or knowing a friend would return his call. There was no emotional drama around it. That's the same energy he now applies to his desires. Feeling it real, Neville Goddard style has become so embodied that doubt feels foreign, almost irrelevant. Conviction changes how he reacts to the world. When he sees something in 3D that contradicts his assumption, it doesn't shake him. He just smiles internally and thinks, that's the old story. There is no panic, no collapse, no spiraling. Creation is finished, explained everything he needs. The end already exists, and he's aligned with it. He notices his language shifting too. He stops saying, I hope, and starts saying, I know. He stops planning for the worst. He stops preparing backup plans rooted in fear. These subtle changes in speech reveal the deeper change in identity. The law of assumption becomes embodied through the way he thinks, speaks, chooses, and expects. People around him may even notice something different, a calm confidence, a softness, a lack of urgency. He no longer carries the energy of someone waiting for life to give him permission. He carries the energy of someone who already received what he asked for. That's the power of conviction. It transforms presence before it transforms circumstances. He realizes that curiosity, constantly checking, analyzing, or measuring, was actually a symptom of doubt. When doubt dissolves, curiosity dissolves with it. He no longer needs external feedback to confirm his internal truth. The feeling itself is the confirmation. His state is the evidence. This is what Neville meant by living in the end. The more this conviction stabilizes, the more life begins responding effortlessly. People show up, opportunities unfold, paths open. Not because he's striving, but because he's aligned. The outer world adjusts to the inner one without resistance. It's a dance he no longer forces. It happens naturally. As this deep embodiment becomes his new baseline, something profound begins to occur. He stops doubting entirely. And when doubt disappears, movement becomes unstoppable, leading him straight into the next realization that changes everything. He begins noticing that the moment doubt falls silent, even for a breath, something shifts in the atmosphere around him. It's subtle but unmistakable, a sense of ease, flow, and forward movement. Neville Goddard tried to teach this again and again. The inner argument is the only block. When the argument ends, the desire has nothing left to push against. It moves. It breathes. It unfolds. He realizes the universe was never withholding anything from him. The delays he experienced were simply the tug-of-war between desire and doubt. One moment he lived in the wish-fulfilled Neville method. The next, he questioned it. This internal back and forth slowed the unfolding. But when he stops doubting even slightly, the law of assumption responds instantly. It's like releasing a stretched rubber band. The movement is automatic. He notices how the energy in his day changes when he holds the feeling it real Neville Goddard style. Things align effortlessly. Conversations go smoother. Unexpected help appears. The world becomes cooperative instead of resistant. This flow isn't magic. It's the natural effect of a mind no longer split between two states. Creation is finished, explained that the moment an assumption is stable, life rearranges itself around it. As he rests in this clarity, he feels something powerful. His inner world finally matches his desire instead of contradicting it. This alignment dissolves the friction he used to feel. There's no more internal debate, no more "what if it doesn't work?" No more emotional tugging. His subconscious is no longer confused. It has a single instruction, and it moves everything toward fulfilling it. He starts to trust his imagination the way he once trusted physical action. He no longer forces steps or hustles out of fear. Instead, he moves with quiet intention. The law of assumption responds not to effort, but to state. And now that his state is unwavering, movement unfolds without strain. It feels like life is meeting him halfway, sometimes more than halfway. He remembers all the years he believed he needed signs before he could believe. Now he sees the reversal. Belief creates the signs. Faith and assumption, Neville emphasized, were never about waiting for evidence. They were about embodying the end so fully that evidence becomes inevitable, and that inevitability becomes the rhythm of his days. He begins catching himself smiling at moments that once triggered anxiety. An unchanged circumstance no longer scares him. He sees it as a fading echo of the old story. He knows the new story is already alive, already moving, already forming. This confidence accelerates manifestation because there's nothing left in him contradicting the outcome. He also notices that people who once doubted him or underestimated him begin shifting too. Their reactions change, their tone changes, their behavior changes. It's not because they changed on their own. It's because his state changed, and people can only meet him at the level of his assumption. Imagination creates reality, and now he's finally witnessing it with clarity. Everything begins to feel rhythmic and inevitable. Even delays feel purposeful rather than threatening. He senses that his desire is not traveling toward him. He is traveling toward it through his state. That realization dissolves any desire to doubt again. Why would he argue with something that is already unfolding? And as this truth settles deeper into his heart, he recognizes a new curiosity rising, not about whether his desire is coming, but about how much faster things move when he lives entirely without doubt, and how effortlessly his next transformation will unfold. So now the question isn't whether the law works, it's whether you'll finally trust the version of yourself who already has what you desire. You've felt the shift. You've seen the patterns. You understand now that doubt wasn't harmless. Doubt was creative, just creating the reality you didn't want. But today, you saw what happens when you stop feeding it. You saw how quickly movement begins the moment your inner world stops contradicting your own desire. But the real transformation begins after this video. Will you catch yourself the next time you're tempted to check the 3D? Will you stay loyal to the feeling instead of the fear? Will you dare, really dare, to live from the end without negotiation? These questions are not tests. They're invitations. Invitations to step into the version of yourself that Neville Goddard taught. The version who assumes, embodies, and allows creation to unfold without resistance. This isn't about forcing. It's about remembering who creates your reality and choosing to stop arguing with your own power. If this message resonated, if it opened something inside you, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every video here is designed to help you master the inner world that shapes everything you experience. Your life moves the moment you do, and today, you moved.